Okay, so um, let's unpack this. Have you ever really, stopped to think about what's actually going on inside an animal's head? It's a question that, well, it's fascinated us for ages.
Oh, absolutely.
Think way back, ancient philosophers like Porphyry were already considering animal social lives in relation to their moral status even.
Right.
Then you have later thinkers like Hume and Darwin kind of seeing echoes of our own social behaviors in the animal kingdom. It's a long history of trying to figure out the animal mind and its connection to our own understanding of intelligence.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating here is that this deep curiosity about animal intelligence, especially their social smarts, it isn't just some modern scientific thing.
Hmm.
These early philosophers were pretty much acting as cognitive scientists, for their time. They were grappling with these fundamental questions. What does it even mean to be intelligent? And how do animal social behaviors shed light on that?
Exactly. And that's what we're diving into today. You've shared this comprehensive piece, Animal Social Cognition, from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy.
Yeah, it's quite the resource.
It's dense,
Yeah.
definitely, but brilliant. A really good overview, hitting all the key points, the history, the core ideas, the ongoing debates. Think of this as your, express route through a complex field.
Uh-huh.
We're going to try and pull out the most insightful philosophical questions and the scientific attempts to answer them, particularly this really tricky challenge of understanding animal thoughts when they don't have language like us.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture for you, the listener, this deep dive is really about how we try to understand minds that aren't our own.
Right.
When those minds belong to creatures we share the planet with, but not a language, it gets really, really interesting. The Stanford entry highlights how different fields, philosophy of mind, epistemology, even philosophy of language, they all kind of collide when we try to figure out what an animal's actions actually tell us about what's going on inside its head.
Okay, so our mission today, untangle some of these central philosophical puzzles and the scientific methods used to explore animal social cognition.
Mm-hmm.
We're particularly focusing on the difficulties, right, of attributing mental states to beings that can't exactly, fill out a survey.
Yeah.
And it seems like a lot of the early discussion and even current stuff revolves around one key concept, theory of mind.
Yeah, theory of mind. This raises a really important question for us to consider. What exactly is theory of mind in this context?
A question.
As the entry explains, the initial focus, heavily influenced by Premack and Woodruff back in '78, was this ability to attribute mental states, things like seeing, believing, wanting, to ourselves and to others.
Okay.
The initial idea was, well, maybe this is something uniquely human, setting us apart in our social intelligence. Premack and Woodruff's core insight was that since we can't directly see these mental states,
Right, they're invisible.
the main job of a theory of mind is to help us predict what others are going to do.
Right, so it wasn't just about whether a chimp could, solve a puzzle, but whether it grasped why another creature might act a certain way because of what they knew or thought or wanted.
Exactly.
That jump from just observing behavior to inferring a hidden mental state that was seen as this major cognitive leap. But it sounds like philosophers immediately stepped in with some pretty crucial questions.
Absolutely. Almost as soon as Premack and Woodruff asked their question, you had philosophers like Dennett, Bennett, Harman raising some really fundamental concerns. Their main worry was, how can we ever be sure if an animal is truly attributing a mental state to another, or if it's just acting based on its own similar mental state or, simple learned associations?
Give me an example.
Okay, imagine two chimps see a banana. One reaches for it. Does the other chimp understand the first one wants the banana, or does it just see the reaching and expect to grab?
Ah, okay. That makes total sense for you to think about. It's like if we both know the coffee is in the left cupboard and I see you reach for the left cupboard, am I thinking you believe the coffee is there? Or am I just thinking the coffee's there and you're going for it, just like I would?
Precisely.
The difference is subtle, yeah, but it makes a huge difference in what kind of understanding is happening, correct?
Exactly right. And this is where the philosophers really emphasize the importance of false beliefs.
Okay, false beliefs.
They argued that to truly show a theory of mind, we needed evidence that an animal could understand when someone else held a belief that was wrong, different from reality.
Ah,
And, crucially, when the animal acted based on anticipating behavior driven by that false belief. This difference, where what one individual knows and what another believes don't match up, became the key test, sort of the gold standard for genuine mental state attribution. Dennett even came up with an early scenario involving, banana lockers to illustrate this.
right. Right. And that directly led to the development of the false belief test,
Mm.
which, as the entry mentions, is kind of a big deal in understanding how children develop.
Huge deal. Yeah.
Think of the classic Sally Ann test,
Hmm.
with the marble. But how do you even try to test for something like that in an animal that can't tell you what it thinks someone else is thinking?
Yeah, that was a major challenge for researchers, sort of acting as experimental philosophers, you could say.
Uh-huh.
The verbal Sally Ann test, where a child can just say where Sally will look for her marble, that's obviously not an option with animals.
Yep.
So they had to get incredibly creative designing nonverbal versions. This often involved setting up situations where an animal could observe someone being misled, and then seeing if the animal's behavior suggested it understood that person's mistaken belief.
It sounds like a real puzzle, though. Designing an experiment where you can be sure the animal isn't just picking up on behavioral cues rather than actually understanding a false belief. And that brings us to this logical problem the entry keeps mentioning.
Yeah.
What's the core of this problem for us to understand?
The logical problem is a really powerful philosophical critique. Basically, skeptics argued that in many of the early experiments that seemed to show animals understood what others could or couldn't see, well, the animals might just be tracking observable things, like where someone was looking, rather than actually representing the hidden mental state of seeing.
Okay, so if a chimp doesn't beg from someone with their back turned,
Mm.
are they thinking that person can't see me so they won't give me food? Or have they just learned through experience, people facing me sometimes give food, people not facing me never do?
Exactly. It's the difference between understanding the reason, the seeing, and just learning the surface level rule of thumb, the correlation. Pavanelli and others really pushed this, arguing that animals might be very good at behavior reading, tracking and predicting behavior based on what they can see, but that this is fundamentally different from mind reading, which involves understanding those hidden mental states.
Right. Behavior reading versus mind reading.
Yeah. They pointed to experiments where chimps seemed to respond to some gaze cues, but not others, suggesting maybe a more surface-level understanding. Hayes even came up with the term submentalizing for this kind of behavior prediction based on simpler processes, not necessarily mental state attribution.
So how did researchers try to get around this logical problem for you? It sounds like a pretty fundamental challenge to the whole idea of animal theory of mind.
Well, the philosophers who were skeptical often proposed experimental designs they thought could, at least in theory, get around these issues. Hayes's goggles design was one of the early examples.
Goggles, how does that work?
The idea was to give animals a learned, visible cue, say, the color of goggles someone was wearing, that reliably told them if that person could see or not. The animal would have to learn this connection through its own experience, like wearing the goggles itself, and then apply that knowledge to understand someone else wearing them.
Ah, that's clever.
Yeah.
You're trying to isolate the understanding of seeing itself, separating it from just the direction of gaze or head orientation.
Mm.
Were there actual experiments done based on this?
Yes, while the exact goggles experiment wasn't widely used, others used similar logic. Karg and colleagues used colored boxes, for instance, and Bugyar and his team used peepholes
Goggles, okay.
to create situations where animals had to infer what another could see based on learned associations with those specific cues, not just general posture. These experiments did show some interesting results, suggesting maybe a bit more flexibility than just following gaze.
So
However,
however, isn't there?
yeah, even these more complex designs didn't completely convince all the skeptics. The debate continued.
It sounds like this constant back and forth, with each new experiment being picked apart and alternative, simpler explanations being offered.
Yeah.
But the field didn't just give up on false belief, right? The entry mentions a renewed interest using eye tracking.
That's right. A more recent approach, borrowing techniques used with human babies who also can't talk, involves eye tracking.
Oh.
The King Kong experiment by Krepeni and colleagues is a key example for you to consider. They showed apes videos where a person in a gorilla suit hid in one of two haystacks while another person watched.
Okay.
Then, while the first person wasn't looking, King Kong might move to the other haystack. The researchers tracked where the observing apes looked when the person returned with a stick, seemingly expecting to find King Kong.
What did they find?
The finding was that apes often looked expectantly towards where the person falsely believed King Kong to be, even though the ape knew he wasn't there anymore. This was taken as evidence that they understood the person's false belief and were anticipating their actions based on it.
Wow, that's fascinating. Is using the ape's own gaze, their anticipatory looking, to try and understand their expectations about someone else's actions based on wrong information.
Exactly.
But the entry also points out that these looking time studies, even in human infants, have faced some criticism themselves.
That's a crucial caveat, yeah. There have been issues with replicating some findings, and there's ongoing debate about what exactly infant-looking behavior really tells us about their underlying understanding. Is it implicit or explicit?
Right.
So, those who are skeptical of infant theory of mind based on these methods are also likely to be cautious about drawing super strong conclusions from similar ape studies. Some theorists suggest that while these ape studies show they can track something belief-like with flexibility, it might not be the same as a full, explicit understanding of propositional false belief like older humans have.
It's like we have all this intriguing data, but figuring out what it truly means about the inner lives of animals remains this huge challenge for us.
Mm.
And it seems part of the reason for this ongoing disagreement comes down to some fundamental ways we think about how social understanding works in the first place.
Absolutely. The entry highlights that even in human social cognition, there's this long-standing debate between theory theorists and simulation theorists.
Okay, break those down. Theory versus simulation.
Okay, so theory theorists think our social understanding works kind of like a basic scientific theory. We have concepts about unobservable mental states, belief, desire, intention, and rules about how these states cause behavior.
Like an internal rule book for minds?
Sort of, yeah. Simulation theorists, on the other hand, think we understand others primarily by using our own mental abilities to sort of imagine or simulate what they might be thinking or feeling in a given situation. We put ourselves in their shoes.
So if you're a theory theorist, you're more likely to look for evidence that animals have some kind of internal concept of belief. But if you're a simulation theorist, you might be more interested in whether animals can mentally put themselves in another's place, maybe using their own experience.
That's a pretty good way for you to understand the difference. And the entry points out that these different theoretical starting points can really shape how researchers interpret animal behavior. For example, the more explicit and language-based aspects of theory might seem less likely in animals that don't have language.
Uh-huh.
This can lead researchers with different theoretical leanings to have very different interpretations of the exact same experimental results.
It's not just one way of understanding others either, right? I think the entry mentioned this idea of multiple systems for mind reading.
Yes, exactly. Apperly and Butterfield proposed this influential idea of a minimal theory of mind, a more basic, efficient system that just keeps track of things like who can see what or who knows where something is without necessarily representing the full content of a belief.
Okay, like a simple registration system.
Yeah, based on registrations of these agent-object location relations, they suggest that this more basic system might be shared across humans, other primates, maybe even birds like corvids. And it could explain some of their successes in nonverbal false belief tasks without needing the full-blown propositional understanding of beliefs that maybe only older humans have. They suggest there might be a second, more complex, flexible system that is uniquely human.
So a raven might understand that another raven saw it hide a piece of food in a certain spot and act accordingly, but maybe without the ability to think, I believe that you know that the food is there.
That's the kind of distinction they're getting at for you to grasp. The minimal theory focuses on tracking these simpler relationships. Who saw what? Who interacted with what object where? There are also other hybrid ideas that emphasize the role of real-time interaction, embodiment, how our bodies are involved in understanding others, and imitation, suggesting animals might be tuned in to each other in ways that lead to smart social behavior without necessarily involving complex mental state representation all the time. Gallagher and Pavanelli have written about this.
Okay, and then there's the big evolutionary question hanging over all of this. Did these social smarts pop up just once in our hominid family tree? Or did they evolve independently in different social species?
That's a crucial point for you to consider. Depending on how complex you think social cognition is and which components you're looking at, you might expect a single origin or multiple independent origins through convergent evolution.
Right.
The fact that we see sophisticated social behaviors and some evidence for social cognitive abilities in such a wide range of animals, from insects coordinating to dolphins to birds to primates, strongly suggests that there might be different evolutionary paths leading to different kinds or components of social intelligence.
So with all these different ways of thinking about it, the experimental hurdles, the evolutionary questions, it's really no wonder there's still such a big debate. And it sounds like philosophers have played a key role in diagnosing why this Tom impasse, as the entry calls it, continues.
Absolutely. Philosophers have offered several really compelling reasons for why these disagreements persist, even with more and more data coming in.
Okay, like what?
Well, one major concern is comparative bias. This is the ever-present danger of either seeing human-like qualities where they might not actually exist, that's anthropomorphism,
Yeah, projecting onto them.
or conversely, underestimating animal abilities simply because they aren't exactly like ours. That's sometimes called anthropogenial or anthropocentrism. There's also Buckner's related idea of anthropofabulation, where we might unknowingly create an unrealistically high standard for human abilities and then unfairly fault animals for not meeting that perhaps inflated standard.
Wow. That's a tough balancing act for us, isn't it? We don't want to just project our own thoughts and feelings onto animals, but we also don't want to dismiss potentially complex thinking just because it looks different from ours.
Exactly. And there's even debate about what the default assumption, the null hypothesis, should be in these experiments.
Okay. And then there's the whole question of parsimony,
Oh.
Occam's razor. What's the simplest explanation for what we observe?
Right. That's a core philosophical issue here. The long-standing debate over whether simpler explanations based on associative learning or more complex cognitive explanations are better or more parsimonious is central.
Uh-huh.
Skeptics often invoke Morgan's canon, which basically says don't attribute a higher psychological process if a lower one can explain the behavior.
Stick with the simplest explanation.
Pretty much.
Hmm.
But those who think animals do have something like a theory of mind might counter-argue that sometimes a single underlying ability to understand minds can actually more simply explain a range of flexible behaviors than trying to come up with lots and lots of separate, specific learning rules for every situation.
It's a good point, too. The complexity might shift depending on how you frame it.
Exactly. And the place where we test these animals, a controlled lab versus their natural environment, that must also play a big role in what we find, right?
Oh, absolutely. There's this fundamental tension between the tight control you can get in lab experiments where you try to isolate specific factors
Yeah.
and the more ecologically relevant natural settings where animals might be more motivated or likely to show their full social abilities.
Right. The entry mentions the different results researchers found with chimpanzees in cooperative versus competitive tasks. Pavanelli and Eddy's cooperative tasks often yielding negative results for understanding seeing, while Hare and colleagues' competitive food tasks seem to show they did understand it.
So, does competition bring out the mind reading?
Yeah, that's one interpretation. Others argue that lab settings are just too artificial and strip away important context, while critics of field studies worry about the lack of control over all the variables. Ristow's classic field studies on deception in piping plovers are mentioned as a contrasting approach, focusing on natural behavior.
It feels like every angle you look at in studying animal social cognition is just full of these really deep philosophical and methodological puzzles for us to think about.
Mm.
Even what we think the purpose or the biological function of these abilities is can change how we design our experiments and what we make of the results.
That's a crucial insight for you. If we think the main evolutionary driver for social intelligence was, say, to outsmart others in competition, the Machiavellian intelligence hypothesis,
Right.
then we'll design experiments focused on deception, manipulation, competition. But if we think it evolved primarily for other reasons, like coordinating actions, understanding intentions for cooperation, or maybe social regulation and mind shaping, as Zawitsky argues.
Mind shape.
Yeah, the idea that we shape each other's minds through social interaction. If that's the function, then we might need to look in very different ways, focusing on cooperation, teaching, or norm following. Andrews has written about this. Even something like being domesticated by humans, as McCloskey and Topol suggest for dogs, could have acted as a strong selective pressure favoring certain social cognitive abilities, like understanding human cues.
And this idea of looking for signature limits, that seems like a really smart strategy. Instead of just looking for successes, look for the specific patterns of failure, right? See where an animal's understanding breaks down.
Yes, exactly. Butterfield and Apperly argued that even if different cognitive systems, like a minimal Tom versus a full belief desire psychology, might lead to similar successes on some tasks, they might have different inherent limitations, different signatures.
Okay.
By designing tasks that specifically probe these potential weaknesses, maybe targeting situations where the simpler system should fail, but the more complex ones succeed, we might be able to get a clearer picture of what underlying abilities are really at play. Recent work by Kano, Taylor, and others has tried to apply this logic.
Finally, the entry touches on this really deep, almost meta-level idea. that the core of the disagreement might actually be about what we even mean when we say an animal is representing a mental state, as opposed to just representing a behavior or a correlation.
Yeah, Buckner argues that this is fundamentally a question about semantics, a question about what makes a representation about something, especially something unobservable like a belief.
That's getting really philosophical.
It is.
Ugh.
What are our criteria, our standards for saying an animal's internal state is truly representing another's belief, rather than just tracking their gaze direction or anticipating their future behavior based on past associations? Some look to evolutionary purpose, teleosemantics, but these ideas can be hard to test empirically. More recent approaches, like Buckner's forward-looking account or proposals by Phillips and Clatterbuck, focus more on the flexibility animals show in using different cues, integrating information, or building causal models as potential indicators of genuine mental state representation. It's a really active area of philosophical work.
Okay, wow. It's clear that while theory of mind was the initial big question, maybe the dominant one for a while, it's really just one piece of a much larger and more complex puzzle for us to consider. The research into animals' social cognition has really broadened its scope in recent years, hasn't it?
Absolutely. Just like in the study of social development in humans, the field has expanded significantly to look at a wider range of social states and behaviors beyond just belief attribution.
Like what else?
Well, for one, really digging into how animals perceive, understand, and respond to each other's emotional states.
Ah, okay. Like empathy.
Potentially precursors to empathy, yeah. Things like emotional contagion, feeling distressed when another is distressed, or even consolation behavior, like those studies mentioned on ravens seeming to comfort victims after a fight.
Right. That's fascinating. It's not just about recognizing an emotion, but potentially acting to alleviate another's distress. And the entry mentions Monceau's argument that animals might be able to attribute emotions to others, even without needing a full-blown theory of mind about beliefs.
Exactly. It might be a different, perhaps simpler pathway to social understanding. Researchers are also increasingly interested in how animals manage and maintain long-term social relationships and whether they can represent others' desires or preferences, especially when those differ from their own. This is sometimes called motivational decoupling.
Okay. And there was that cool scrub jay study
Yeah.
mentioned.
Yes. The specific satiety experiments by Ostojic and colleagues, male scrub jays that observed their female partners eating one type of food until they were full satiated, later preferentially shared or cached the other type of food for her. It suggests they tracked her recent experience and inferred her current desire.
That's really clever. Understanding what someone else wants, even if it's different from what you want.
It points towards a more sophisticated understanding of others' internal states. And then there's play behavior,
Right. Which might just seem like fun and games.
but could actually be a really crucial area for understanding how social coordination, cooperation, trust, and maybe even early forms of moral behavior develop.
How so?
Well, Beekoff's work, for instance, really highlights the potential role of social play, turn-taking, self-handicapping, signaling play intentions, and developing a sense of fairness and trust among animals.
Oh,
While there are debates about how much cognitive sophistication is needed to understand pretense in play, understanding that a play bite isn't a real bite, it offers a valuable window into the evolution of shared intentions and managing social interactions. Rosenberg, Allen, and Beckhoff have discussed these issues.
okay. Then there's imitation, which seems so fundamental to how we learn, how culture gets passed on.
Definitely.
But even defining what true imitation is like, copying the specific actions versus just achieving the same goal through your own actions. Emulation. That's complicated, isn't it?
Very. Hayes laid out criteria for true imitation, and the debate about whether humans are unique in this precise form of copying is still very much alive. There's also over-imitation, where children copy even irrelevant actions, and studying that in animals presents methodological challenges. Allen, Andrews, Huber, and others have explored this.
Right. And the whole story of mirror neurons, that seemed like such a breakthrough for understanding imitation and empathy and mind dreading at first.
Yeah, there was huge initial excitement when mirror neurons were discovered, neurons that fire both when an animal performs an action and when it observes the same action performed by another. Galeese and Goldman proposed they were key to simulation. But the subsequent research and philosophical critique from people like Jacob, Sachs, and Spalding has shown the picture is more complex. While mirror neurons are still considered important for social cognition, their precise role in imitation and mind reading is now seen as more nuanced and perhaps less direct than initially thought. They might be part of the story, but probably not the whole story.
Okay. And speaking of passing things on culture, the question of whether animals have culture has been a big discussion for years, right?
Yeah.
Especially with chimpanzees and their tool use variations.
Oh, yeah. Huge debates. Whiten and colleagues' paper identifying numerous potential cultural traditions in chimps really kicked things off, building on earlier work by Bosch and others. But then you had contrasting views, like from Tomasello, arguing that human culture is fundamentally different due to things like teaching and cumulative improvement.
The ratchet effect, right? The idea that human culture builds on itself over generations in a way animal traditions don't seem to.
Exactly. Dean, Tenney, and Tomasello have emphasized this cumulative aspect, linking it to uniquely human forms of cooperation, shared intentionality, and maybe language.
So has the focus shifted now?
Somewhat. While the debate about the richness and mechanisms of animal culture continues, there's perhaps less argument about whether traditions exist. More minimalist definitions of culture, focusing simply on socially learned behaviors shared within a group, are allowing researchers like Danchin, Whiten, and Bridges to explore cultural phenomena in a much wider range of species, not just primates.
Okay. And finally, the entry discusses this really intriguing, maybe even provocative area,
Hmm.
moral emotions and what might be early forms of normative behavior in animals.
Right.
We're moving beyond just asking if animals feel something like empathy
Right.
to asking whether they can understand and follow social rules or norms.
Yeah, exactly. This is a really exciting frontier, connecting animal behavior to the very roots of morality. It builds on work by people like Rollins and Monceau on moral emotions, but pushes further into normative cognition.
So what does that look like? What's normative cognition in an animal?
Well, Kristen Andrews introduced the concept of naive normativity, the idea that animals might implicitly understand, follow, and even enforce group-specific practices or social norms without necessarily having explicit concepts of right and wrong like humans do.
Interesting. So like knowing how we do things around here.
Kinda, yeah. Researchers are now actively looking for evidence of this norm tracking behavior. This could involve things like conforming to group foraging techniques, responding negatively when others violate established social rules, like cueing etiquette perhaps, or even showing signs of third party enforcement. Work by Rohr, Vincent, Monceau, Fitzpatrick, Powell, Schlingloff, Moore, and others is exploring this in various species. It suggests the building blocks of normative behavior might be more widespread than we previously thought.
Wow, that was a truly deep dive into the world of animal social cognition. We've really journeyed from ancient philosophical ponderings all the way to the very cutting edge of neuroscience and behavioral science, all in this pursuit of trying to understand the animal social mind. It's so clear that this is a field just brimming with complex questions and, frankly, incredibly creative scientific minds trying to unravel them.
Absolutely. And the Stanford entry does such a good job of highlighting how crucial the interplay between philosophy and science is in this particular field. Philosophers aren't just sitting on the sidelines commenting, they're actively involved in shaping the questions, designing experiments, raising those fundamental conceptual issues, and helping us make sense of the often ambiguous data.
Yeah.
The intricacies of animal social cognition, all these challenges we talked about, they really force us to re-examine some of our most basic assumptions about minds, about intelligence, representation, and maybe even morality.
So for you, the listener, hopefully this has provided a quick but pretty comprehensive overview of this fascinating and, let's face it, complex area. You can see how these seemingly simple questions about, what's that dog thinking, lead to these really profound philosophical debates and require incredibly ingenious scientific methods to even begin to answer.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely a field where those aha moments often come from grappling with the different viewpoints and the nuances of the arguments
Right.
rather than just finding a single, easy answer.
And if we bring this back to that idea of acting as philosophers ourselves, what becomes really clear is the vital role of critical thinking, questioning our own assumptions, considering multiple perspectives, being aware of potential biases like anthropomorphism or anthropogenial.
Right.
The study of animal social cognition really shows us that gaining knowledge isn't just about collecting facts, it's fundamentally about how we frame those facts, the theoretical lenses we use to view them, and the deeper conceptual work we need to do to truly understand their meaning or implications.
Okay, so here's a final thought for you to really chew on, something to ponder after we finish. Considering the incredibly intricate social lives and the complex behaviors that we're constantly discovering in so many different species, what might our entire understanding of intelligence and maybe even consciousness itself look like if we truly tried to move beyond a purely human-centric viewpoint and genuinely consider the perspectives, the capabilities, and maybe even the experiences of the non-human world?